Annielytics. And now, welcome to the Annielytics podcast with your host, Laura Edel.
Good evening and welcome to An Eye for an Eye. I am your host, Annielytics, and I am so glad to be here today with Kathleen Mitford. Kathleen joins us on the podcast today with an amazing background that I'm so excited to get into. But foremost, coming 15 years from one of our great partners, PTC, now leading into being a CVP in Azure marketing. So welcome, Kathleen, to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here today.
Oh, we couldn't be more excited to have supporters of women in tech in general, and your energy, just wanting and sharing that story of your career journey with us has been palpable. So I have been so excited. There's some guests that come on. I love all my guests, but some of them you just get really excited to talk to. So I just am very appreciative. And if you would like to, really run us through a little bit of your background, I think the listeners would be very excited to hear, what brought you to where you are today at Microsoft.
Okay, well, I actually have a really interesting background for being in the tech industry. So I remember when I was like maybe 7 or 8 years old, I played with what were called fashion plates. You're probably a little too young to remember what fashion plates are, but fashion plates were, they were these plastic things where you could change out the design. So you could change like the hat, the shirt, the skirt, the pants, and shoes. So from the time I was 7 years old, I wanted to be a fashion designer.
That is amazing.
I actually started my career as a fashion designer, and I worked as a menswear designer in New York for many years. But I was really only a designer for, I think, probably about 5 years.
Okay.
And I've spent the majority of my career in technology. And what happened was I got the dream job that I wanted. I did it for a couple of years and I got kind of a little bit bored. And I'm like, oh man, there's a pattern here. You look at what's happening in Europe, you look at what's selling, and you go design what's next. And at the same time, the company I was working for was implementing a system, a CAD system, computer-aided design, to computerize, we just got in computers on our desks back then, the whole design process. And I ended up implementing it.
Oh,
and
wow.
That actually was my start into technology. So did that, and it was a new system. So I spent so much time on the phone with the software company. They said, well, you come and work for us.
So while you were troubleshooting, trying to figure everything out, then they were so impressed with you on the phone. They're like, we need you. Come work for us.
Exactly. But after that, we had this successful implementation at the company I was working for. So that was my first entrance into technology. And it was a small company. It was more of like a startup company. So I got to play a lot of different roles. I went in a services role, then went into a product management role, did pre-sales. So kind of got to learn all the different roles in technology. And then I had another great opportunity that this company got acquired by another startup out in California that was moving all of their development onshore to China. And they needed somebody to help them create a development office in China. And I had the pleasure of being able to work on that project. So got deeply involved and really understanding not just product management and product marketing, but what is the entire software development process? What does an engineer do? What does a quality specialist do? What is a product owner? How does that tie into customer success? So that's really where I learned a lot hands-on about the technology industry. And then I went from there to where I spent most of my career in technology at a company called PTC. And PTC, they provide industrial software for engineering, manufacturing, and servicing products to mostly manufacturing companies. And there, again, a great career where I had a variety of different roles: strategy, product management, product marketing, leading their engineering team, leading partners, leading acquisitions, leading corporate marketing. And they were a partner of Microsoft, and that's what brought me here. And I've been here at Microsoft not quite a year yet, and thrilled to be here. And really enjoyed the journey of not only my career, but it landed me here at Microsoft.
What a, that's such a brilliant story, because if you think about it, a lot of folks I talk to think they have to graduate directly into tech if they're going to become, a woman in tech. And the reality is our careers, our journeys are never linear. They're often take, the form of what could be through the fashion world. And I truly love that story because it showcases a few things. One, that there are roles in tech that you don't even realize exist sometimes when you start out in your career, and that you stumble into, you realize you love. And that too, your career starting in one industry can blossom in so many others. And what's so great about your journey is, starting in fashion in one area, and then, being brought into more that technology sphere, and then really holding all of these various roles leading you up to your partner and then to Microsoft. I think you've held the hat of almost every department I can think of in an tech org. And so what led you from that into landing in marketing, being that becomes your focus out of all the different hats that you wore in your career?
Well, some of it is marketing, but some of it's also the opportunity. So I've always kept an open mind, when I look at my career journey and when I look at different opportunities. So two different things led me here. And I actually wasn't looking for a new role, but then once I started talking to Microsoft, not just about this particular position, but about, this opportunity with Azure. So I would say there's a couple different things that led me to my role today. Number one, just the opportunity with Azure. And even before that, Microsoft, Microsoft is a fantastic company. And also it's a company whose purpose, missions, and values really align a lot with my own. And that was something that was important to me in any career change that I was going to make. So first there was Microsoft and being a company that was really purpose-driven and aligning with that. Next, it's the Azure opportunity. Wow, with Azure. If you look with Azure, when we look at the cloud has moved from being a technology enabler to being a business disruptor. Yeah. And we are powering that with Azure, whether it's through the infrastructure that we provide, whether it's through how we're helping customers transform their businesses with apps, what we're doing with data and AI. So it was really exciting to have to be able to work on a business that is growing so fast and is so exciting and so innovative. And then I would say the third part of it is just product marketing is what I love. You're here, what we call at Microsoft, a DRI for the business, the directly responsible individual. So being able to work with so many teams here at Microsoft on what is the strategy for the business? What does that mean to what we're going to do in the product and what we're going to engineer? How do we position that? How do we work with the sales and customer success and the field team to make sure that we are being able to deliver value to our customers and communicate value? And then being responsible for the numbers and being held accountable for that. So it really brings together many of the things that I've done throughout my entire career and help kind of like put that in a little package. And also, I'm a very collaborative person. I love being around people. I love collaborating with people. I love bringing groups of people together and being able to get people to coalesce and get excited about one idea. And in marketing, you have to do a lot of that. You get a lot of different opinions about what the customers want, from all the different fields. So being able to bring everybody together and help align and drive a strategy around that really excites me.
No, it's great. It's funny, as we were setting up for this podcast, you can tell that you have that eye for marketing because you said, how does my background look? And it was so beautiful with the flowers, I just loved it. And so, it reminds me of, I won an award in the past at Microsoft where I got the opportunity to meet Chris Capicella. And at the time I was very junior. And so I was a little nervous. And so I had this stuffed narwhal that my son gave me to travel with. And I remember asking him, this narwhal's been in the hands of everybody I can think of. So would you mind taking a picture with it? And I remember he staged it. He's like, the lighting is better here and from this angle. So he made sure the narwhal balanced. And I just love that, stepping back thinking, I gave the same narwhal to Judson. I gave it the same narwhal to JPC. Those are the leaders of our organization. And each one approached it very differently. But I always appreciated Chris's because he set the picture. And frankly, the picture was the best out of the three. It balanced all the right notes.
Oh, that is so funny. You talk about that with your son. Pre-COVID, I used to travel a lot, and I have a 10-year-old daughter and a 6-year-old son. And my daughter used to give me a stuffy that would travel everywhere with me. It's a little purple poodle. So wherever I would go, I would take a picture of myself with the purple poodle.
That is exactly like me too. That's exactly, this narwhal has been everywhere in the world with me, and to that same point, so I could send it back, letting my son know, hey, I'm thinking about you, and here's,
Exactly.
Yeah, it's funny because during that time that I was also traveling a lot, one of the things I didn't appreciate, I had my son take the love language for children test. And so essentially, for those of you listening who don't know, the love language tells you, what type of, love language you are. Do you appreciate time with your partner? Do you appreciate, the touch? Is it service oriented, which mine happens to be, so you do things, honey, do you want a massage? Honey, do you want me to go to the grocery store? Apparently that's my love language. And my son's, I thought, was gifts, receiving gifts is another love language. And it turns out his was spending time with me. And so what a crushing sort of heartbreak moment to realize I'd been buying him all these things on my trips, as well as sending the pictures home, that all he really wanted was me to be home. And so, being 11, he's now told me that. And I now think about that as we get ready to start opening up and traveling again. How have you balanced, your career growth and trajectory, along with, being a mother with your family?
Yeah, that is a great question. And let me come back to that love language after I talk about one of the things I remember when I was pregnant with my daughter, and I was very nervous about how I was going to balance being an executive and being a mom. And at the time I had my children later in life. So I was almost 44 when I had my son, and almost 40 when I had my daughter. And at that point, you're established in your career. You've got people expect you. They know that they can get you at 5:30 in the morning, and they know that they can get you at 8:30 at night. But they do know that I am an early riser, and by 9 o'clock, I'm normally in bed. But anyway, so I was worried about what was that going to mean for, number one, my work-life balance. And also, we had made the decision that my husband would be, at that time, a part-time stay-at-home dad. So he was going to, awesome, very, very similar. And I was really worried about this, and two things. Let me start with first my daughter. So somebody gave me really great advice that children know the normal that you create for them. Okay. And that has stuck with me to this day. So my children know that mommy goes to work, even if that means that half the time mommy's going into her office in the house, but mommy's at work, and daddy's is taking care of them. So number one, setting that normal for them, that this is what is normal for our family. So there's that. Then there's also setting expectations and boundaries with the people that you work with.
Right.
So I was really worried that I worked for a lot with the executive team and with the board before I was on the executive team at the last company I was at. And I was like, oh man, I have a lot of meetings that are at 4:30, and I need to leave the office, by 4 o'clock at the latest to get home to breastfeed, my child.
Right.
People adjusted to that. People adjusted to knowing that if we want to have a meeting with Kathleen, we can meet with Kathleen from 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning till 4 o'clock at the latest, and then Kathleen's done. And that was like profound for me, that I could set boundaries. Right. And that I could actually have people who I reported into, and even the CEO of the company, respect that these are the boundaries for me. So those were two important lessons on, number one, normal for your family is what you make of it. And then number two, make sure that you set the boundaries that are right for your family. So then in addition to that, for me, it's ruthless prioritization and delegation, which I thought I was good at before having children, but then after having children, it's a whole other ball game.
I love that. Ruthless prioritization. What a great expression.
Ruthless prioritization, and then also using it as an opportunity to lift your team up. I don't need to lead any meeting. I don't need to do every presentation. I don't need to do every keynote. Right. I've got a fantastic team. How can I help lift my team up and give them opportunities to participate in projects or initiatives that they want, to take on a new skill on being an executive speaker? So that, and then I would say the last thing is figuring out with my family how they know I'm going to be spending time with them.
Yeah.
And
how'd you do that?
How do I do that? I'm still working on that.
Okay.
But my children know that there's times in the evenings. So most evenings, even now, I try to block off at least an hour to an hour and a half every evening, that it is bedtime, it is bath time, it's doing homework, it is it's cuddling with my kids. My daughter's 10, going on to some of those years, she's not quite a teenager yet,
totally
but
get
I'm
it.
starting to hear some of those preteen emotions. So trying to protect that time,
Yeah.
but then also setting boundaries, and boundaries isn't right, but letting my children know if there's nights where I'm not going to be able to do that. I have a late meeting tonight, so letting
Set
my
the
children
expectation
know.
so they don't get disappointed because they're waiting for you. I
Exactly.
love
And
that.
letting them know that, hey, Wednesday night, mommy's got a work dinner. But guess what? Mommy's so excited to be spending time with you this weekend. And then making sure that I actually follow through on that.
Which is
Where
the
it's
key.
not, where it's not time where we're cleaning your room together, or, but we're
Right.
doing something that the kids love, whether it's going to the park, or my son loves to garden and I love to garden.
Oh, I love that.
So, we planted in the spring in the fall, a bunch of tulips and daffodils together. So again, and it's different. So, but actually making sure that I follow through with it, because if I don't follow through with it, they remember, and
do.
it just it makes the next week that much harder.
Did you grow those tulips behind you by chance? They're so lovely.
I'll let you in on a little secret. They're fake.
Oh, really? Oh my
Okay,
gosh, those are some of the best fake tulips I've ever seen. So, for those of you listening, not viewing, I'm definitely making a clip of this for you too, because these are beautiful. I cannot believe those are fake.
So this actually came from my daughter too, because
Oh, really? Oh, what a great gift.
so my daughter was like, Mom, that every Saturday you're spending about $15 on
Which is
tulips
true.
and you die. And I had some fake ones that I had in the closet. She's like, why don't you just buy more of these and put these out, and then you don't have to buy, real tulips.
The logic of the 10-year-old. Sometimes we all learn. It's like the reverse mentoring at its best.
But don't get me wrong, I still do buy fresh flowers because I love fresh flowers.
It's my guilty pleasure too.
But I love having some ones that, really look realistic.
They really are quite beautiful. And, I think the key that you mentioned that I couldn't agree with you more is it's twofold, setting those boundaries. It's so remarkable how I too had those same concerns of coming back to work, how I was going to balance this, are they going to judge me if I need to take off time because there's something going on, or an event? Because I knew right away that, my mom was a single parent and didn't get to go to a lot of my functions. I wanted to make sure that I was able to go to the functions, it's very important to me. But I was nervous, about setting that boundary. And yet you're so right. It's by articulating it. The reality is most people, at least in my experience, all have understood. They get it. And, they prioritize oftentimes in their own worlds. And so it's something that, that we then share on. But when you don't let somebody know, then how do they know? And then you maybe make decisions like, well, I'm not going to go to that because it's choose my job, but you've not given them the chance to say yay or nay on that boundary setting. And the worst they can do is say no. And the reality is, if you don't set those boundaries, people will take any time they can get because you're important. And so, but by setting them, it just establishes, the model coach care mentality for both yourself, but also for your team, to let them know it's okay to do these things. We respect you and you as a parent, as a head of household, whatever it might be, to have those. So I think the boundary setting is key. But more importantly, I love the fact that you have to follow through, because you could set up all the boundaries all you want. And if you're breaking them, well, then it is sort of like having no boundaries. And so would you say, as you've come into your different roles, when you were younger, where you're now, did you find yourself a little bit more nervous, or was it harder for you in your earlier career days to set those boundaries? Or were you just as confident around, whether the boundary was, I'm going to take this class and I'm taking it, and I'm just going to let them know? Or did you have any challenges with that in speaking your voice when you were younger in your career?
So a couple different things on setting boundaries. I would say I didn't set any boundaries, earlier in my career. And there's good to that and there's bad to that. Okay. And I do think early in your career is an opportunity for you to really shine and really flourish, because, before having children, And when you have roles that maybe are not as senior, you know, you have a little bit more opportunity to,
It's true.
you know, it's not a big deal if you're on a call at 7:00 at night. Not saying that, you know, that the time of younger employees isn't as important, because it most certainly is.
Absolutely.
The difference is, when I was younger in my career, I wanted to be doing that. I wanted to be learning. You know, you'll often hear about me being a curious learner. So I never felt that the time that I was spending and the hours I was putting in was a chore, or I wasn't enjoying my job. I actually looked at it as a learning experience. Also, because throughout my career, I've had so many different roles, and I haven't been afraid to take on new challenges. So taking on a new challenge meant that I probably needed to learn a new skill, a new function, you know, a new team. And I got excited about that. So no, I didn't set the boundaries earlier on, but I didn't see it as a problem, because it was something I wanted to do for my career growth.
Great point.
I did have a challenge earlier in my career on using my voice. You know, I grew up in a large family. I went to, you know, Catholic schools, and was taught, respect your elders, you speak when you're spoken to. Okay. So earlier in my career, if I went to a meeting, I would make sure my executives were prepped, which you always have to do.
Of course.
But I wouldn't do the speaking. I would let them do the speaking, even when I was the subject matter expert. And, you know, finally, you know, through coaching and mentoring, one of my mentors pulled me aside, and he's like, Kathleen, how come you're not speaking up? And I'm like, well, because my boss is in the room. And he's like, but you're the expert, you know? So that was a wake up moment for me, because people were taking me not actually speaking up and not having an opinion.
Right.
And that wasn't it. It wasn't that I was intimidated. I didn't think it was my role.
Your play.
So I actually encourage all of my employees now, if you're invited to a meeting, unless you are told otherwise, use your voice.
There's a reason you were invited to be here. Absolutely.
Unless it's a meeting where we're listen only, you know, people want to hear from you, whether it's talking, whether it's in the chat. Again, unless it's in you know, it's something that's just informational.
And usually they'll tell you that coming into the meeting, that this is like a listen only, we're going to mute the audience. You know, usually there's not any guesswork around it, but, you know, we find ourselves, I too, you know, in not speaking up because, you know, there was, you know, all the power heads were there, and why would they want to hear from me? I prepped my boss, you know, but I think you're absolutely right. And I love that you set that standard today. Did you find that were there ever, like, let's just say the first time you did it, did it feel nervous? Like, you know, this is the meeting, my mentors told me to speak up and I'm going to do it. Were you nervous?
Oh man, I was so nervous. And I would say it did, like, this wasn't an overnight, you know, this was a whole path of, you know, over multiple years of learning multiple different things. Okay, when is it appropriate for me to use my voice? How do I use my voice? How do I read the room to make sure that when I'm actually saying something, it's in an appropriate time to have impact? So I was nervous as heck for the first couple of times, because when I was working on this, I was in a strategy role, and the meetings were always with the executive team of the company. So here's, you know, me and the whole executive team. And again, earlier in my career, and anyway, but a couple things that helped me is there were people in the room that knew I was trying to use my voice. So I had a mentor, you know, who was on the executive team, and there was two things that were helpful. Number one, he would amplify my voice. Okay, so he would make sure that when I spoke up, he'd say, like Kathleen said, and bring it back. And then the other thing was, after the meeting, he'd give me feedback, and he would say, hey, you did this really well, but you could have done this a little bit differently. The combination of that, having somebody there to help amplify, and then somebody who's observing me in the moment, and to be able to give me immediate feedback afterwards, you know, helped me really figure out how to use my voice.
So, you know, it's interesting. I love the idea of coming out of a meeting and doing the what went right, what went wrong, what we could have done differently conversation. And recently, you know, I've realized that there has to be a level set of trust between them, because, having that, we all say we want feedback. And I love the point, and, we just went through Dare to Lead and really understanding from Brene Brown, what it means to lead with vulnerability. And one of the areas is, how do you know you're ready to give feedback? And it's, when you're ready to take feedback. And one of the parts that she has in there talks a lot about the trust, though, established between the person giving it. Otherwise, there's this whole idea of, well, what is their motivation? Why are they giving this to me? If this is your boss, then that's usually in a place where they're trying to help you grow. But even in that situation, taking that feedback can be hard. Did you find, have you always been somebody who welcomes feedback, or have you had any struggles as people were giving you feedback, to how to process it, so that voice in your head didn't replay all the things you did wrong and sort of, I'm very driven. So I would take the smallest minutia and let it beat me up forever until finally one day I realized, like, I'm not renting you space anymore. Get out of my head. Like, this is feedback and I can choose to keep it, or I can choose to, re-gift it away. How did you deal with the feedback as it was coming into you?
Oh yeah, that is a great question. And I'm very much like you there, so it's really leading into the growth mindset, here at Microsoft, because my natural personality is to take that feedback and say, oh my goodness, I'm doing this wrong, I'm doing that wrong. Oh my God, I could have done that better. So it's kind of taken years of training myself to be able to say, what do I want to do with that feedback? And, actually I was just today here in the office, had a meeting with my boss, and afterwards he's like, hey, can we chat? And gave me some feedback. And so the first thing I said I want to do is let me understand why you're giving me feedback. Okay. Mm-hmm. And again, I'm open to feedback, but it has helped me to say to somebody who's giving me feedback, okay, why are you giving me feedback? Are you giving me feedback because you want me to understand the other person and how they like to, interact? Are you giving me feedback because I did something wrong? Like, what do you want me to do with that feedback?
I love that.
So that has been something that's helpful for me. Not always right at the beginning. It could be at the beginning or afterwards, and saying, okay, why are you giving me this feedback? Are you giving me this feedback, again, because you wished I would have been more prepared and done something different? Are you giving me this feedback because I didn't read the room or the other person and you want me to learn how to interact with them? Or are you giving me this feedback because kind of you're quite annoyed in how I handled the situation? So that also helps me compartmentalize that feedback. Okay, this is a feedback learning session that I didn't actually approach it wrong, but the person I'm meeting with has a different style than mine. So you need to, kind of change the way that you interact. So I think that's also helped me with feedback. I also have to watch, I can get in my own head. I can be like, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose my job. But you
testifying,
it's so small and it becomes like this big thing. So I also have to make sure I don't get, that I don't get inside my own head and, take that feedback for what it is and the place it could have.
No, it's crazy how, I too am that way, and I will write a narrative. So there have been times that I'll come out of something and I'll have read the room one way, and maybe my boss will say, do you have a minute? But I can't talk to you right now. And so in the time between that, do you have a minute coming out to when we do, I will have a whole script, Hollywood worthy, written in my head about all the things that went wrong. And, oftentimes we'll come back together and it'll be something like, oh, did you notice so-and-so was in the room? I'm like, oh, no, I didn't. Oh, that's it. Okay. But, most recently, I got a piece of feedback in coming to, a new group that, I have dyslexia. And so typically when I start in a new team or with a new management chain, I will let them know that early on. And just to give them an idea of, there are some tools I've learned as a child that I carry through. And I think they're what make me sort of the out of the box thinker I am today. But, some of it borrows on repetitiveness, but it's really my way to make sure I've heard something and translated it correctly. And so the feedback I was given very much pointed at that, why were you being so repetitive? And I remember how quickly it triggered, my childhood and sort of the bullying I went through. And it was so funny, in all these years and the growth I've done in speaking up for women, how almost fragile it was to go back to that one spot. And it was the first time it's happened where someone mentioned repeating. And so I've taken some time since then. And at that moment, I let my new team, I was like, oh, I forgot, let me just let you know a little bit about me. I know you're new. So here's me in a nutshell. And so it's a moment of here's feedback. And suddenly I'm telling you I'm dyslexic. I know it was a lot in that moment, but what I appreciated coming back is realizing that we are always, like you said, being that, forever curious person. I also think of myself as a forever learner, always leaning in to learn. Do you find that as you've transitioned through your career, do you ever get harkened back to moments where you're like, you never stop learning, like, wow, that really did bring me just back there. And, I've got to, these are things I should work on. I mean, have you had those moments in your own career that, sort of remind you, shake you up like, wow, I do need to work on that? Has that ever happened to you?
Of course, that's happened to me. And also, like you say, bring you back to that moment where maybe there was something that, you actually felt like it was, I'm not going to say a bad moment in a career, but a moment that
it's a moment. Yeah.
a moment you remember and you're like, I didn't really feel that good about. So I do have those moments. And what I try to do is, just like we were talking about earlier, make sure that it has its own place. What is this? What am I feeling? Why am I feeling this? Am I feeling this because it's reminding me of how I was feeling in that other moment? Am I feeling this because the person is reminding me?
Right.
So yes, I absolutely have those moments. I'm not sure I have the best advice as to how to.
I always like to share the advice to the listeners who are having this, but I think maybe it's one of those where we're all still learning. And so,
I think what I like to leave with my team is, even when you look at executives, they go through the same things that every one of us go through, on having those, imposter syndrome. Am I, do I know enough to be here? Do I have the right things? But put those moments in their place, So what I do to myself, I was doing another podcast yesterday and I have a Wonder Woman sign behind me.
I love it.
And it says, if you could be anyone, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was but it has a statement and I look at it whenever I'm having a bad day, because it's like, Wonder Woman, you got this, Kathleen. And I say that to myself, like, if I'm going to get up in front of a big presentation, like, especially if you're presenting in front of 10,000 people, I'm like, you got this, So don't let those moments, let you question yourself. There's a reason why you're in the role that you have. There's a reason why you were asked to do something. Don't let anybody, don't even let yourself, don't let anybody else, or don't let anything in your mind question whether or not, you're the right person.
You should be there. No, it's very much reminding me, the very first conference I ever was invited to speak at was the CFO magazine conference. And I was in my young 20s. And I call this now my Elwood syndrome. So I go down this escalator in a giant hotel and there's a sea of navy blue suits in front of me, mostly men. And I'm in like a very pretty pink shade suit as you are. So it immediately stood out into this audience of navy blue. And I remember immediately like feeling like I can't do this. I was like psyching myself out as the worst sort of enemy. And I remember I had this fluffy pink zhuzh that I'd put on my lanyard to go down there. And, my notebook got caught in it. I tripped over the escalator. And so everyone turns around. And so it's even the worst situation ever. And I have it marked in my head as just I was going to run away. And there was a gentleman who had seen all this happen behind me. And I guess he knew maybe that nervousness I was going through. And I remember he stopped me and he said exactly what you just said. He said, you got this. You're here for a reason. And I don't know who that person was. I wish I could go back and hug him and just be like, thank you. Because it was those moments, those words in that particular time when I realized I'm just going to, I'm going to laugh about this. I'm going to tell this as a story in my icebreaker when I get into this conference room hall. I didn't need it because the first thing I did is tap on the mic and all I heard was whoo, whoo, whoo through the So I'm like, yep, I guess it's working. So, I think it's brilliant that you say that, because no matter where we are in our careers, I've had a 14-year-old on who was just becoming a data scientist to having the CEO of MXD on most recently. And we all are people and we all share this common, moments that get us nervous. Nobody is the automaton or autonomous. Nobody's the robot that is going to be able to handle every situation. And so, Kathleen, as we round this out, I would really love to know, if you had your imparting words you could give to yourself in a younger age, where you could go back in time and say, hey, I want to give you this piece of advice that's going to help you throughout your career. What would that advice be?
Yeah. So the advice that I would give to my younger self is have confidence and you got this. And it's not that I didn't have confidence. It was just believe more in yourself.
Mm-hmm.
You are your biggest advocate, and you have to be your biggest advocate. Throughout your career, you're going to have bosses, you're going to have mentors, you're going to have sponsors, you're going to have peers that are going to, be your advocates and, help you along your career journey. But you have to own that journey. You really have to own that. You need to believe in yourself, and you need to, have the confidence to go after that stretch role. Ask for that bigger assignment. So, because when people see you believing in yourself, they will believe in you as well.
I love that. And what a great way to end the podcast today. I can't thank you enough for being on the show today. And to all the listeners, Kathleen, do you have a set of, whether it's your Twitter or your LinkedIn, that others, if they wanted to reach out to you, would you be open to having any questions answered that way?
Absolutely. Feel free. I've got both a LinkedIn account and a Twitter account as well.
We will post that on the published podcast. And thank you so very much for being on An Eye for an Eye with Annielytics. I'm Laura Edel, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you, Lara.
Bye-bye. So 3, 2, 1. Okay, let me stop recording.
Loved what you've heard on this week's episode? Well, the answer is simple. It would mean the world to us if you could head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star review and feedback. Spreading the word really is the best way to grow our podcast and achieve even greater things. Thank you.